Welcome back, Focus Learners, to another explainer. Today, we are taking a massive leap forward. We're moving away from, just taking those basic everyday snapshots, and we're finally leveling up to truly professional-grade photography. Okay, let's dive into this, because what we're looking at today is literally the absolute core of what makes a photograph breathtaking.
I absolutely love this quote. It's really the core thesis for everything we're going to cover today. Camera settings control exposure, but composition controls the message. And yes, for sure, knowing your aperture, your ISO, your shutter speed, that's all super important, right? It gets you a correctly lit image. But getting the exposure right is just the mechanics of it all. Composition? That's the art. Composition is how we actually tell a story, how we guide the viewer's eye exactly where we want it to go, and ultimately, how we evoke genuine emotion.
So, here's our game plan for today. Think of this as our course syllabus. We're going on a really clear journey here, starting with step 1, the foundations, then moving to step 2, structuring the frame, and finally, step 3, dynamic perception.
All right, part 1, the foundations. Beginner level. Let's get right into it.
The absolute first thing we need to do here is address a really common bad habit, placing every single subject dead center. To fix that, we use what's called the rule of thirds. Just imagine a giant mental tic-tac-toe grid dividing your frame into 9 equal sections, 2 vertical lines, 2 horizontal lines. And where those lines actually cross, you get 4 intersections, or what some people call power points. So instead of just dumping your subject right in the middle, you want to place your main focal points exactly on those intersections. Like if you're shooting a portrait, try putting the subject's eyes on that top right or top left intersection. Or if you're out shooting a landscape, place the horizon on the top third line to really show off the foreground, or the bottom third line for a huge dramatic sky. It works incredibly well because it creates this balanced asymmetry that just feels totally dynamic and perfectly natural to the human eye.
Next up in our foundations, we've got leading lines. This is essentially using natural or man-made lines in your scene to literally guide the viewer's eyes exactly where you want them to end up. You're looking for things like roads, pathways, fences, or train tracks. And this is a brilliant trick, really, because it shows how much you can control the viewer's experience. If you position your camera so these lines start near the bottom corners of your frame and sort of stretch inward toward your subject, it forces the viewer to physically travel through your image rather than just giving it a quick glance.
Now let's look at this really fascinating contrast, filling the frame versus using negative space. When you fill the frame, you're getting right up close. You're cropping out all the unnecessary distractions, so your subject takes up almost the entire image. That creates an unbelievable sense of intimacy and intensity, which is absolutely perfect for detailed portraits. But on the flip side of that, we have negative space. This is where you intentionally leave large, empty, quiet areas around a really small subject. Think of a vast blank wall or a huge clear sky. Instead of intensity, this gives the image a real sense of scale, solitude, simplicity. It just gives a breathing room. They're both super powerful. It literally just depends on the exact story you're trying to tell.
Let's move to part 2 and see how this builds. Structuring the frame. Intermediate level.
As we transition from just positioning a subject to actually utilizing the spatial environment around them, one of my absolute favorite techniques is framing within the frame. And this means exactly what it sounds like, using elements in your environment to create a natural border around your subject. You might shoot through a doorway, a window, an archway, or maybe some overhanging tree branches. And hey, the frame doesn't even need to cover all 4 sides. 2 or 3 sides work just fine. By shooting through a physical opening like that, you instantly isolate your subject, and as a bonus, you hide a cluttered background. The result is an image that just has this instantly polished, deeply artistic feel to it.
Now, to make your photos feel real, you really need depth and layers. We want to take a flat, 2-dimensional photograph and give it a real 3-dimensional feel. You do this by intentionally staging objects at different distances. So you place something close to the lens in the foreground, like maybe some rocks on a beach, and that anchors the bottom of the shot. Then your primary subject sits right there in the midground. And finally, your background, like distant mountains, is kept there to show scale. Deliberately staging these 3 layers actually mimics human binocular vision. It makes that flat photograph feel like a real physical space you could just step right into.
Then we have symmetry and patterns, capturing perfectly mirrored halves or repeating visual elements. Look, the human brain absolutely loves the rhythm and order of clean symmetry. Think of architectural reflections in water, or endless rows of columns. So satisfying, right? But here's an advanced twist for you, the pattern break. Imagine you find a highly repetitive pattern, let's say a massive rack of red apples. If you introduce just one breaking element, like a single bright green apple, and you place it right on a rule of thirds intersection, boom, it instantly commands attention.
Okay, for scenes with strong action, we use golden triangles. Here is exactly how you do it. Step 1, draw a diagonal line from one corner of your frame all the way to the opposite corner. Step 2, draw shorter intersecting lines from the remaining two corners so they meet that main diagonal at a 90-degree angle. Step 3, place your key elements right along those divisions. This grid is an absolute game changer because diagonals convey speed, action, and dramatic perspective way better than rigid horizontal or vertical lines ever could.
All right, part 3, dynamic perception, advanced level. This is where things get a bit more psychological. Now that we're at the advanced level, composition becomes a lot less about placing items on invisible grids and much more about visual weight and storytelling. For example, 3, 5, 7. Just let those numbers linger in your mind for a second. What do they actually have in common, and what in the world do they have to do with photography? Well, those numbers represent the rule of odds, and this is a totally fascinating psychological principle. When you're photographing multiple subjects, like flowers or a group of objects on a table, grouping them in odd numbers, like 3, 5, or 7, is actually way more visually appealing than even numbers. But why exactly does this work? It's because even numbers of objects, like 2 or 4, naturally create pairs. The brain effortlessly organizes them into these neat little pairs, which can actually make the image feel really static and divided. But odd numbers, they completely prevent the brain from pairing things up perfectly. And that forces the eye to move continuously between the subjects, which keeps the viewer mentally engaged. Pretty cool, right? Next up is visual weight. So certain elements in an image pull the eye much heavier than others. For instance, warm colors like red and orange absolutely demand immediate attention compared to cooler greens or blues. High contrast areas, they carry the heaviest visual weight in the entire frame. And of course, faces and text are just magnetic. The human brain is literally hardwired to look at faces and read words before looking at anything else. So the crucial point is this: you can use this knowledge to your advantage. You can actually balance a massive low-contrast object on one side of your frame with a tiny, high-contrast warm-colored detail on the exact opposite side, and that creates this perfect dynamic balance.
Then we have juxtaposition. This is all about placing contrasting, clashing, or just completely unexpected elements right next to each other in a single frame to create a really compelling narrative. You're looking to capture visual contradictions. So think of, say, an ancient stone church dwarfed by a sleek, modern glass skyscraper, or maybe a tiny green plant forcing its way out of a crack in solid gray concrete. It can even be an emotional contradiction, like someone laughing joyfully in a really gloomy, rainy setting. Doing this moves a photo from just being pretty to being deeply intellectually engaging. It makes the viewer stop and actually think about what they're looking at.
We've covered the grids, we've covered the lines, and the psychology, but that brings us to the real climax of our explainer today. A very, very important question. When should you break the rules? Get ready, because we are about to turn everything you just learned completely on its head.
The answer is intentional rule breaking. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that crucial word, intentional. Because breaking the rules of composition poorly just looks like, well, an amateur mistake. But knowing the rules so deeply and so intimately that you can break them with a specific purpose, that is how you create a powerful psychological tension and a mood that standard, textbook rules simply cannot match.
So here are a few ways to intentionally break those rules. First, extreme centering. Remember earlier how we said do not put things dead center? Well, if you do put a subject dead center with absolutely zero negative space around them, it actually creates a highly jarring, confrontational look. Next is the Dutch angle. This is where you purposefully tilt your camera slightly off level, and that creates this immediate sense of unease, confusion, or even frantic energy. And then there's edge tension, where you place your subject right at the very edge of the frame, looking out of it. It purposefully makes the viewer feel claustrophobic and tense. By making the image almost perfect but slightly off, you generate just massive psychological tension.
And that brings us to our ultimate conclusion. Mastery is knowing the rules well enough to shatter them for emotional impact. You now have the foundational rules, you have the structuring tools, and the advanced psychology to tell literally any story you want. The only question left is, which of these rules will you intentionally shatter in your next photograph to completely control your message?